Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. You can be forgiven if the narrative on the Afghanistan drawdown from the Biden administration has you a little confused. And that's because it's confusing and contradictory. So on one hand, we're told it's a massive success, the biggest airlift in history, in fact. And only America and the Biden administration could have pulled it off. And on the other hand, it's a total mess, and this mess was inevitable. The president told us that last night. Now, there was no clean way to wind down this withdrawal, right? I mean, it's not a conventional war. So I understand that argument, but at the same time, I don't understand the argument where Biden says, you can't blame me at all. I bear no responsibility. Blame Trump. That's what Biden says. And it was Trump that called for the hasty exit, he says. And Biden was just carrying it out. And it's a mess because there was no avoiding it. But on the other hand, it's also a huge success, he said, and we should be incredibly proud of the government's effort. If you're confused, you should be. You have every right to be. There's a lot about this narrative that doesn't exactly make sense. And when something doesn't make sense, it's probably because facts and truth are being covered up. Managing perception, that's the goal of this administration now. So enter the latest revelation about the days and weeks leading up to the worst wind down to any conflict in American history. Now, the whole conflict or war, not really technically a war, it was 20 years long, cost America $1 trillion in treasure. And in terms of blood, which also was treasure too, 2,300 American lives were lost, along with 20,589 wounded. No one disagrees that mission creep and nation-building fantasies led to this endless quagmire in Afghanistan. Some kind of exit was necessary. I mean, we did what we were going to do, and yet we stayed there, right? We decentralized Taliban. We ran al-Qaeda out of using Afghanistan as an Airbnb for terror HQ. Both Trump and Biden seem to kind of align on that. So did Republicans and Democrats. But how America exited, that's what mattered. Now, on this score, the Biden administration, well, it failed miserably. $85 billion of equipment in Taliban hands, 13 dead servicemen, along with 170 dead Afghans, hundreds of abandoned Americans still on the ground with no way out. Now, the question is this: could this disaster have been avoided? What did we know about the collapse of the Afghan army? When did we know it? Now it appears that some of the fog of this particular conflict is clearing and the truth is emerging. Reuters got a hold of a transcript from a presidential phone call that occurred on July 23rd with President Ghani, formerly of Afghanistan. It was a 14-minute call. Now, the transcript of this call was provided on the condition of anonymity by a source. That's another topic entirely, by the way. Who gave this transcript to Reuters? Who leaked it and why? So maybe is it deep state intel? I mean, seriously, what is the agenda here? Because it undermines basically everything that the administration was saying, although a lot of people know this. In any case, according to Reuters on the call on July 23rd, it's incredibly clear that Biden understood that the Afghan army was collapsing and the situation was spiraling out of control. However, rather than admit that fact to himself or the world or even to Ghani, Biden instead asked President Ghani to give the impression that he had a plan to control the situation. So in other words, Biden asked Ghani to lie and pretend that everything was okay. From the transcript quoted by Reuters, it says, and I quote, "I need not tell you the perception around the world and in parts of Afghanistan, I believe, is that things are not going well in terms of the fight against the Taliban," Biden said. "And there is a need, whether it is true or not, there is a need to project a different picture," end quote. Now, Biden went on to say that America would continue to provide much-needed air support to the Afghan army, provided we know what the plan is. But the key point to understand here is this: we knew the Afghanistan government and the military were collapsing. In fact, former President Ghani on that call said this about the dire need to shore up the Afghan army situation, quote, "We need to move with speed. We are facing a full-scale invasion composed of Taliban, full Pakistani planning and logistical support, and at least 10 to 15,000 international terrorists, predominantly Pakistanis, thrown into this," end quote. Now, that's the president of Afghanistan trying to tell President Biden that his government was in deep trouble. This is like 2 months from the withdrawal deadline. So our intel agencies knew, our military leaders knew, and President Biden knew. And in fact, Biden essentially asked the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, to lie, to project this image of stability when we all know it wasn't true. Now, it's clear that the call shows that Biden knew the situation was dire in Afghanistan way before the evacuation date. And this also contradicts claims from the administration that they had no idea the Taliban would take over so quickly. Again, Ghani warned the president that about 15,000 terrorists were about to invade the country. Now, Reuters has spun all of this to say that this transcript somehow supports the idea that Biden didn't know the collapse of the Afghan army was imminent, was at all imminent. I mean, everything on this call would indicate that everybody knew, both parties knew things were going south and going south rather quickly. So how clear was the collapse to President Ghani? I would imagine pretty clear. I mean, it was so clear, he bailed in a helicopter without even telling his aides. No joke, his aides came back and they discovered that their Afghan president was gone. Now, nobody can reach Ghani for comment on all of this. Apparently he went to Doha, but the one statement that he did make is that if he had stayed, it would have led to more bloodshed. So he hightailed it out of there. And it was obvious to President Ghani that America did not have his back. There was no more, hadn't been for a little bit now, no more U.S. air support. And so he was out. Now, remember, according to the leaked transcript, Biden promised air support to Ghani, provided that he knew what the plan was. So why would we make American air support for the Afghan army contingent on whether or not Ghani provided a plan? Who cares what Ghani's plan was? We have thousands of Americans and allies on the ground in a country whose government was on the very verge of collapse. So why are we asking for a plan from Ghani when we were the ones who were giving him the plan all these years? Where was America's plan? We're the ones who needed a safe and orderly exit of thousands of our own people and our allies. And how in the world would an Afghan army that was already struggling to hold control in province after province have any chance of repelling the Taliban without American air support? Yet in his speech yesterday, Biden says no one really expected this collapse. Watch.
The assumption was that more than 300,000 Afghan national security forces that we had trained over the past 2 decades and equipped would be a strong adversary in their civil wars with the Taliban. That assumption that the Afghan government would be able to hold on for a period of time beyond military drawdown turned out not to be accurate. But I still instructed our national security team to prepare for every eventuality, even that one. And that's what we did. So we were ready when the Afghan security forces, after 2 decades of fighting for their country and losing thousands of their own, did not hold on as long as anyone expected.
But you didn't see it coming. Now, according to the leaked transcript of that call on July 23rd, Biden told Ghani, president of Afghanistan, former again, to lie and say that it was going better than it was. I mean, clearly Biden was worried about perception, and he was less worried about dealing with the reality on the ground, an unfolding reality that would soon manifest into one of the worst military. This is one of the worst things I've seen in terms of military strategy ever. So why was he so focused on projecting this perception that the Afghan army was doing well when clearly he knew it wasn't? So here again is the president, this time on July 8th. This is 15 days before this call with Afghan President Ghani. Now, he seemed to want to project confidence in the Afghan military. Take a look.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well equipped as any army in the world, and an air force against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable.
Yeah, he was lying. He was lying to the media then too. Did he really believe that the Afghan army was in good shape? Because their entire creation was predicated upon us supporting them for success. Or did he just want to give the perception that they could do it on their own? I mean, why? Is it because he had already committed to the withdrawal and the news of a collapsing Afghan army might compel the American government? I don't think he was worried about that. I think he was worried about, he knew what would happen. When the moment that you start withdrawing troops, the Taliban starts advancing. And why cut the air support for the Afghan army? What about handing over $85 billion of weaponry and military supplies? We've equipped them more so than many smaller NATO nations. Seriously, it's more than the aggregated amount of equipment we've given to Israel in the last 40 years. This may be the greatest contract. I mean, he built them back better. That's what his slogan was, wasn't it? We should actually, in the future, sidebar, we need to ask politicians when they come up with these slogans about doing stuff where they're building back things. Like, are you talking about America or really? Think about this. We left 75,000 vehicles, 600,000 weapons, 200 aircraft. How does that happen? And it also appears that the Taliban got pallets of $100, as you can see in this video of them doing this too. They got, look at this, they got cash too. I'm just gonna ask a question for the class. How hard is it to round this stuff up? All the night vision goggles, so they have that tech, all the pallets of cash, just put them in a field and, I don't know, drop a Moab on it. How about that? I don't know, I'm just asking some questions here. This is insane. You know, they always say that they demilitarized vehicles. What does that mean? You took away their Sirius radio? Like, what is that? Now, yesterday, if you remember, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan entertained the idea that America might even give aid to the Taliban. Watch.
You say we're going to work with the Taliban. Does that include the prospect of giving them aid?
Well, first of all, we do believe that there is an important dimension of humanitarian assistance that should go directly to the people of Afghanistan. They need help with respect to health and food aid and other forms of subsistence, and we do intend to continue that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to go right to the people. So $85 billion of military equipment falls into Taliban hands. Or maybe, is it like an early down payment on that American aid that we're talking about giving the Taliban? Only if they're good little boys and girls, of course, I'm sure. And secure the exit, actually really just boys, because the women can't go out without a male escort. I forgot about that. And secure the exit of thousands of trapped Americans, hundreds of which have still yet to leave the country. I mean, I'm not saying that that's what happened, but, you know, just speculating that that's maybe what happened. The narratives are so contradictory. And this is not the first time, by the way, that Biden's been involved in something like that. Do you remember when Obama and Biden gave Iran pallets of cash as part of our nuclear deal? $400 million of which was handed over to Iran the day after they released 4 hostages. Some Republicans called that a ransom, if you remember. But $85 billion in military hardware falling into Taliban hands aside, Biden now acts like he's always wanted out of Afghanistan. And he's claiming that he's the one who ended this war. You don't end a war. You win a war, you lose a war, or you negotiate a peace treaty. And it's kind of a stalemate. Biden acts like this pullout was the fulfillment of a long-held dream, yet at every turn for the last 20 years. Let's not forget, Biden was senator when he voted for the authorized use of military force indefinitely. He was the one who voted for an indefinite presence in Afghanistan. Biden was the one who voted to fund an indefinite presence in Afghanistan. As vice president for 8 years under Barack Obama, Joe Biden was the one who prosecuted that endless presence in Afghanistan. And as president, he still was doing it. He was the one who changed the date. Trump at least has been consistent from the get-go about his desire to get people out of these forever wars. You can like him or not. I don't really give a rat's backside what people think about his mean tweets, but for the love, he's been consistent on this issue. But Biden's a chicken hawk. He votes for all these Middle East conflicts. He voted to go into Iraq. He voted to go into Afghanistan. And then he likes to string up our soldiers with ROE, all these insane rules of engagement where every time they squeeze the trigger, they got to worry about JAG behind them looking over their shoulder. He was part of the drone strike happy Obama regime, which authorized 542 drone strikes, killed an estimated 3,797 people, including 324 civilians. Some of them were American citizens. Even George Washington gave those who betrayed him to the British a trial and due process. Because, see, you can't claim that you're going to uphold the values of a republic while violating the values of a republic. So Biden he's been what? He acts like he's been so great on foreign policy in the Middle East, but he's been a mess from the get-go. And why does it matter? Because he's been here for all of this. This guy has been in government longer than I've been alive. The least that he could do is make sure that he had an exit plan for a conflict that he funded and prosecuted for the last 2 decades. The least he could do is deal with the reality on the ground. The Afghanistan government was crumbling. He knew it, actually, even before July, when the Afghanistan papers came out because of Washington Post getting these discussions between military leaders. We knew that our leadership was lying to us. They've known about it for some time. They knew that when they withdrew troops, that Taliban was going to advance. They knew that, Ghani knew it, and we know that. But instead of dealing with reality, he was worried about perception. And he still seems most worried about optics again. His administration's optics, to be clear. Not like the night vision, the very expensive night vision that average American civilians cannot get, but we just went ahead and gave to the Taliban. You know how Texas, by the way, passed all these laws, including one on the availability of silencers and constitutional carry? Okay, well, now all the Taliban have constitutional carry, okay? Yeah, not everyone here in the United States so much. So the president claims both success and failure at the same time, which explains why the narrative from the Biden administration is so ridiculously confusing. And by the way, here's President Biden doing exactly this thing with George Stephanopoulos. Watch this exchange.
So you don't think this could have been handled, this actually could have been handled better in any way? No mistakes?
No, I don't think it could have been handled in a way that we're going to go back in hindsight and look, but the idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens. I don't know how that happened.
So for you, that was always priced into the decision?
Yes.
Okay, so the Afghan drawdown can't be a success and a mess. It's kind of one or the other. And you can't own one part of this exit without owning the other part. And you can't pretend that you didn't see this disaster coming when we have, again, Afghanistan papers, Washington Post published a couple of years ago, and the transcript from Reuters that shows, yes, he absolutely did have ample warning. So, seems like once again, Biden's more concerned about optics and perception than about reality. And the reality is that this drawdown is a failure for the ages. The issue was never staying in, it was how we were going to get out. And no matter what confusing story Biden wants to tell to change this perception, everyone knows this disaster is most definitely his fault. Coming up, Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano joins me to discuss the 5 ways Biden's leadership, or lack thereof, went bad. Keep it here. How much equity do you have in your home? Cybercrime experts are alerting homeowners that the more equity you have, the greater the chance criminals will target you. Home title theft is one of the fastest growing crimes, and Home Title Lock, America's leader in home title protection, is warning homeowners that they could potentially be victims and not know it. And here's how. Cyber thieves search hundreds of public databases for high equity homes. They find your home's online title, forge your signature stating that you sold your home, and then take out loans with your equity. Insurance and common identity theft programs won't cover you. So protect your most valuable asset and register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim and receive a complete title history of your home, a $100 value for free. Visit HometitleLock.com. Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano has a great piece that breaks down the 5 ways, just 5 ways. These are 5 big fat ways that President Biden's leadership went bad. Carafano says that Biden clearly must have ignored sound military advice because no person who graduated boot camp would have planned a military operation like this. And Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano is the Vice President for National Security and Foreign Policy at Heritage Foundation. He joins me now. Good to see you, sir. Thanks so much for your time. 5, and I know it was probably hard for you to stick to 5.
Yeah, look, I was in the Army for 25 years. I went to every military school you can go to. I think I've written I don't know, I lost count, maybe 4 military history books. I've planned military operations. But I got to tell you, when I looked at this, it was like I threw privates out of the Army that were drug-addled, that had better military sense than this. So this is why I really actually believe that Biden personally made these decisions, because there's no way that any competent military person would have done any of these. The one that gets most discussion is, why did we give up the high ground? People intuitively get this. If anybody's ever been to Gettysburg, right? They know you want to be the guy at the higher position, the dominating thing. Well, in an evacuation, those are airfields. Controlling the airfields are the high ground. And there's an airport in Kabul, and there's the Bagram Air Force Base, and everybody knows we walked away from Bagram. And you go, well, why would we do that? Well, Biden was so terrified that we might take casualties or have like a Black Hawk moment or something, that he refused to let the military put in more troops. So he basically said, you can do whatever you want. See, it's the military's decision, right? You can do whatever you want, but you can't have any more troops. Well, you had 2 airfields, and you had the embassy, and so they decided they couldn't secure all of that. So essentially what he was doing was, he was giving them this nonsensical choice. It's like Sophie's Choice. It's like the German guy saying, which kid do you want to live, right? And then they said, oh, well, you got the kid killed because you made the choice. I mean, it really was nonsense to blame the military for that when it was a direct result of Biden's decision.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me that surely, and I don't know how it works when you have the President of the United States and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and they're all in the room, but surely someone, I just remember hearing all throughout the previous administration when people would sort of take it, they took it as like they were virtue signaling if they disagreed heartily with former President Trump, but nobody was going to disagree with Biden on this. I mean, surely they had to have big arguments over this. No one tried to stop him.
Well, this is why it's their fault too. You know, I wrote this piece in the Washington Times actually before the Afghanistan debacle when I said this is the worst generation of military leaders that we've had in recent memory, and these guys got to go. So let me tell you how you get out of this problem. You're briefing the President of the United States, and he says, oh, you do whatever you want, but you can only have 2,000 troops. And you look the President in the eye on the record and you say, Mr. President, I want you to understand that if we do this, very likely we will get Americans killed, and there are a lot of Americans that we will never get out. And I just want you to understand that that's what you're telling me to do. You're telling me to decide today that to do a military option, which I will guarantee you will not meet the objectives you just get me. So is that what you really want me to do? Virtually no president of the United States will ever say, oh yeah, go ahead and do that, right? On the record, that can be published later for history. So there are ways to do that. But when you have a military commander just say, oh yes, Mr. President, I will do the best I can with the resources you give me, march on. Okay, they are meeting their constitutional oath to obey the orders of their president, but they are failing their country, they're failing their president, and they're failing the nation by essentially doing something that they know is wrong, and later on they'll say, well, that's what the president said, and we support the president. All this kind of weaselly language. You know, this is their MO. You know, nobody ever got fired under Obama. Nobody gets fired under Biden, because here's the deal is, you guys work with me and do the despicable evil stuff like Tony Soprano once in the mafia, and I will never like throw you out and have you killed, right? You will never be cut, right? So
well,
this is the deal.
And didn't under former President Obama they would get fired for insubordination to bad orders, like with Petraeus. I mean, if they disagreed and that came out, then he'd fire him for that. I mean, and that was like sound advice that they were giving.
Right, it's just like the mafia. It's like you will get killed if you don't do what the Don says. But as any other murder, rape, whatever, we'll cover for you, brother, because that's what we do. We'll pay off the judges. Yeah. So it runs just like a mafia. So the only people that get fired are the people that actually do anything of integrity.
Wow. And we really honestly needed more of that. And I think that was one of the most stunning things, because I remember when it first came out that we were going to walk away from Bagram. And I thought, I know from what I understand, it's a 50-minute drive outside of Kabul, but you're not surrounded by a city that's densely populated, where you have ISIS-K sprinkled throughout, and you have really not enough intelligence to go on to determine who is who, and then to give up control of the perimeter and most of the city to the Taliban and rely on them to run the checkpoints. No wonder we have Americans we're not bringing home.
Well, that's the same thing. I mean, the Taliban said, well, you guys can control the city. We didn't have enough troops to control the city, and Biden wouldn't give that, but gets to the other point is, you say, everybody says the enemy gets a vote. You design military operations to take away the enemy's options. Don't let them vote. So as an operation unfolds, you can do more things and they can do less. That's the way they're designed. Biden flipped that on its head. He basically, by limiting the number of troops and by not coordinating with the allies or doing anything else, he limited his options to zero, other than the perfect cooperation of the Taliban. So he got it exactly backwards. He enabled the bad guy to have more options and more control, and he took his away. This would be like during the Cold War. If Kennedy had gone to the Russians and said, at the Cuban Missile Crisis, I'm just going to get rid of all my nuclear weapons. You guys do what you want, right? And then see how that goes.
Yeah, Dad, not well. You also added that declaring mission accomplished, that's a bad leadership move.
Well, one of the things I think actually contributed to the ISIS-K attack on the airport is we made it a more lucrative target by saying everything was so wonderful and it was going so successful. So that was literally like waving a red flag in front of a bull that attacked me, right? Embarrassed me. This is what terrorism is all about. It's about creating fear and humiliation. So in a sense, by saying everything was perfect, you essentially were daring them to attack you. And of course, we had no real way to protect ourselves. So it was a very foolish thing to do. to have that kind of false bravado in the face of determined terrorists.
Yeah, and it's weird also for the president to say that mission accomplished. This was so successful, the biggest airlift in history. Of course, it was also probably one of the biggest abandonments of American citizens in history too. That obviously would necessitate a big airlift. But then simultaneously to say it's all my predecessor's fault. It's all his fault because of the deal that he struck from what the deal that, as I understand it, really wasn't even in effect by the time Trump left office.
Yeah, so bits of this are coming out now, and I've heard this from different angle and distant sources. And this is where Biden made not just a strategic mistake, but a political mistake, because he basically made Afghanistan a referendum on his decision making. But when the evidence comes out, and it's already starting to come out, he's going to look really bad. So here's what happened. Biden convinced himself that Afghanistan was going to fall to the Taliban. And he was worried about he wasn't worried about 38 million Afghans or the people in the country. He was worried about the politics, that this would make him look bad. So he didn't want it to happen on his watch. So what he wanted to be able to do is to get out, and then everything would collapse. And then he could say, oh, wasn't there, it's not my fault. That was the plan. So he pushed the Taliban and Ghani together to try to forge a deal where essentially Ghani would hand the country over to the Taliban. Well, Ghani got weak knees and he bolted, took a bunch of cash and fled the country. The Taliban were recalcitrant, they really wouldn't make a deal. And so then he was faced with a situation where the Taliban were going to roll in. There was not going to be a handover, and he had already decided that they were going to bug out, which meant you can't talk to allies, you can't process SIVs, you don't want anybody to know you're leaving. So then knowing the premise that the Taliban were not going to roll in until after he was gone, knowing that premise was not true, he executed his plan anyway. And of course, what happened? The entire evacuation was at the behest of what the Taliban were going to let him do. Of course, it was a disaster. This would be as if Eisenhower sat down with the weather guy on, May, whatever, the original date, and the guy says, we're going to get terrible weather. If we do this, we're all going to die. And Eisenhower says, well, that's the day I wanted to invade, so we're going to go ahead and invade anyway.
We just have to stick with the plan.
You cannot make decisions based on what works for your politics. You have to make decisions based on what's going to have effects on the ground. But actually, if you listen to Biden's speech yesterday, where they just repeated the same old talking points, the interesting thing, what's consistent about all of them, is they're all designed not to address the problem, but to address domestic politics, to remove the criticism from him. And actually what history will show is that his entire response, and I'm not talking about the guys on the ground trying to evacuate people and that, but the entire response from the White House, enabled by the Secretary of State and the military, was about protecting the president politically. It wasn't about dealing with the crisis. If it was about the Cuban Missile Crisis, if JFK had gotten everybody around that big table and looked him in the eye and said, I don't care what happens, but I better not lose any votes because of this. Well, and of course, the irony here is, because he made such incredibly bad decisions as a commander-in-chief, he managed to do the one thing he didn't want to do, which is embarrass himself and make himself look like a weak leader.
Yeah. Last question for you. I'm talking to James Carafano on this insane drawdown from Afghanistan, which I don't have anything in my life to actually compare this to. Just going back and looking at history, maybe, as you were saying, like Bay of Pigs, Cold War, or Vietnam, something like that. But is it correct, the headlines that we've been seeing, that we've basically given the Taliban a great Air Force at this point? I mean, all of the equipment that we've given them. I see all of these memes on the internet where it's Sun Tzu, but it's obviously not a quote from Sun Tzu, Art of War, where he says the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you well equip your enemy. Obviously, it's a joke, but that's exactly kind of what happened here. I mean, they have so much. They had a parade.
Yeah, you know what I worry about way more? This administration wants to normalize the Taliban and work with them, because we have no leverage. Point. And the problem is the Taliban will just play us, right? They'll let us kill ISIS-K. ISIS-K are useful idiots, but they won't let us go after the Haqqani and Al-Qaeda. This is going to be a carbon copy of what we did with the Pakistan intelligence services. They're just going to play us in the same way. And these guys are going to be happy to be played because it looks like they're using diplomacy and they're salvaging this. So, and what they're really doing is, remember, Al-Qaeda and Haqqani are committed global terrorists, right? The global jihad is all they live for. They are religious zealots and terrorists. And they will only redeem themselves. They will only have honor if they can get back to where they were, which means they have to do another 9/11, which means they're already planning the next 9/11. They're all going to go back to Afghanistan and they're going to plan that again. And it's important that they do it in Afghanistan because when they strike us again, they'll go, look, we killed the Americans again. We killed them the same way and they couldn't stop us. They have to do this. They cannot help themselves. It's just like Hannibal Lecter having to have, beef for dinner. It's just not going to stop. And this administration, by engaging with the Taliban, is going to enable them. That's why, no matter what we do, it is so important that we immediately have an independent, nonpartisan investigation of what happened. After 9/11, we had a Republican president and a Republican Congress, and they established a 9/11 commission. And they did it because, one, they recognized that transparency is important and the American people had a right to know. But they also did it because we have to understand where we are and what's going on so we know the right way forward. Even Pelosi, she took the results of the 9/11 commission and passed a law to improve our response. This Congress has to look beyond their partisan politics, which is the way their president's looking at that, and know that they have to establish an independent commission. We have to know what the facts are because we could be on the verge of the second global war on terror. Just like Chamberlain screwed up the results of World War I and created World War II, Biden has screwed up the results of the first global war on terror and maybe started another one. And we have to put a stop to that. Maybe if we have a real, honest, nonpartisan commission that lays all this out to the American people, not to put political blame game, that's the easy part because we're going to be able to find plenty of that, but to really show what happened and why and how to go forward. I really do think that's the most important thing we have to do now. We have an open border. We have millions of people pouring in across the border we know nothing about. We have a Homeland Security and Justice Department that are focused on persecuting political enemies as opposed to tracing down terrorists. We got to get our act together, and we need that galvanizing moment to do that. I don't know what else can do that because Biden's not going to do it.
No, I know, and that's the scary thing. We are all of those pieces that create the perfect storm are in place. It's scary to think about. 20 years later, and where are we? Back at square one, maybe even less than that. Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano, always good to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate your take on stuff.
God bless you.
You too. Thank you. All right, folks, coming up, Dr. Omar Hamada joins me to discuss more, not just on Afghanistan, but also a lot of laws went into effect here September 1st in Texas, including an abortion law that went into effect today. We'll discuss that. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves premium coffee to people who love America. They develop their explosive roast profiles with the same mission and focus that they learned while serving our great nation. And with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. In 2020, they donated over 6 million cups of coffee to veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. Their high-quality coffee beans are imported all the way from Colombia and Brazil and then carefully roasted at their facilities in Tennessee and Utah. They even have a signature roast called Lava Panther that's directly sourced from a small farm in Guatemala. So although the temperatures are starting to cool off, except in Texas, don't forget to keep enjoying the great outdoors, fueled by Black Rifle Coffee. And the best way to do that is with the Black Rifle Coffee Club. And when you join, your chosen brew is roasted, packaged, and shipped free to your door. You also get special discounts, gain access to exclusive products, and a lot more. You can purchase at blackriflecoffee.com/Dana. Use code DanaTV at checkout or code Dana at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first Coffee Club order. A lot to talk about with Afghanistan and, the major extraordinary success, as we were told. Also in Texas, a ban on abortions at 6 weeks went into effect this morning. A lot of other laws did too, September 1st. This after the Supreme Court and a federal appeals court failed to rule on pending emergency requests that were brought by abortion providers. Joining me now to discuss this and all of those latest developments in Afghanistan is Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Omar Hamada, who spent 25 years in medicine, 15 years in the Army, 10 of which were with Special Forces. And as I understand it, he was a flight surgeon. Dr. Hamada, thank you so much for joining me today. Good to see you.
Thanks, Dana. Great to be here.
Of course. So first, let's look at this Texas law. I know there were a lot of things that went into effect today. This was making headlines, and I've seen some very I've seen a lot of hyperbole about this, a lot of exaggerations about what this law does and actually doesn't do. And of course, as everybody knows, the heartbeat around six weeks usually. And so at that point, now what they're saying is that if a woman is going to go through with an abortion procedure, then you can have citizens that can actually bring civil suits against this. And of course, there are restrictions, against going after the woman who's getting the procedure, et cetera. But I wanted to get your thoughts on this because I don't really agree with the argument that people are saying that it's banned because apparently you can still go up to 6 weeks. It seems like 6 weeks is kind of long enough to make up your mind.
It seems like it would be, but some people like to take a little bit longer. And, there were extremes. I mean, if we remember 2 years ago with what Cuomo did in New York, it was all the way up to 40 weeks full term. And that was definitely 6 weeks is, it should be enough time. I haven't actually had a chance to look at the legislation, but from what the headlines say, I think this is an incredibly good move.
Yeah, and yes, I agree. And of course, I remember what was this? Probably about 8 years ago, the last time that they said Texas was closing all of the clinics, it was because they were requiring these abortion providers to simply have a doctor with admitting privileges on staff and maybe an anesthesiologist. If you're going to be considered to a health clinic, then maybe meet the requirements that every other health clinic is asked to meet in the state of Texas. And they were saying, no, they're going to shut down abortion providers. They're closing all the clinics. So that obviously wasn't the case either. But no, big move from Texas.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. And we were trying to do the same thing here in Tennessee with heartbeat legislation. It sort of got shut down in our legislature, but we hope to bring it back at some point. But if there's a heartbeat, there's no disputing that that's a life. And we think life actually becomes an exception, but the heartbeat is sort of a definitive point of life.
Well, I mean, and you would think that people who, especially since the mantra for the past year and a half has been follow the science, you would think that the people who scream that the loudest would maybe follow the science on that. Switching gears now, I want to kind of go in back with your past and your record of service, everything that's been happening with Afghanistan. Of course, the president yesterday said that the evacuation was an extraordinary success. I have to get your response on that. Do you consider what you saw the past couple of weeks to be an extraordinary success?
An abject failure is what he should have said.
Yeah, abject failure. I think that's probably how those 13 families that were welcoming the flag draped coffins coming in at Dover. I think that's pretty much how they would describe it. The number of refugees, the number of people, special interest, special immigrants visas that were not processed, even American citizens that had paperwork that would receive texts from the State Department, the embassy through the State Department, who were telling them stay home or stay where you are, shelter in place, don't try to make it to the airport. One of the big reasons they weren't able to get there was because of the direction of the State Department and Taliban checkpoints. So don't you think that makes it even more incumbent for some kind of rescue, something to happen to get the rest of these Americans out?
Definitely. And, it's inexcusable, Dana, that would have happened. I mean, on two parts. Number one, the Taliban had offered our government full control of Kabul as well as the airport. And we turned it down. We basically said, we don't need full control. We just need the airport. We don't need Kabul. And because of that, 13 Marines died and other Afghan allies and U.S. citizens were not able to approach the airport. Number two was that the DOD did not allow them to even get into the airport. Gates were welded shut. I have friends and colleagues that are there on the ground that I'm in contact with and being told that they even had buses of women coming in, begging to be let in, American citizens showing their passports, and the DOD, the State Department, would not let them in. The gates have been welded shut. They were not allowed to get into the airport.
That's so incredibly sad. And now who knows what we would even be able to do. I had a friend that was there with the Operation Pineapple Express, getting some of those interpreters and those informants out, and they were wheels up. I think, if I understand it correctly, I think they were wheels up late Sunday night to try to get out, because at that point, Taliban, there was video of them getting into the areas at the Hamid Karzai airport there where our soldiers had been just hours, maybe an hour before. Incredibly bad. Your thoughts on what's going to happen? Because you had said in an interview I read with you, you had said, "Oh yeah, the Taliban's going to have this. This is all going to be taken over and done by Sunday. It's not even going to go to the 31st." And you were correct on that. So what happens now? What's next for Afghanistan?
You know, it could go either one of two ways. The Taliban is a known quantity. We know who they are. We know what they have done. We know what they can do. So the ball is in their court. They have full positive control of the country. And they're going to have to make the decision, are they going to continue being radical Islamic terrorists that rule by the butt of a gun or the barrel of a gun through violence and fear? Or are they going to be, Miley calls them our partners now, and I don't agree with that. But, the battlefield changes. And I mean, at one point, Germany was our enemy. Now they're our ally. Russia used to be our ally. Now they're not. So things change. But if the Taliban decides that they want to actually be civilized and have a government that works for the people, with secure freedom that they are able to deliver, then fantastic. But hopefully they choose that and they don't choose to be what they have been.
Well, as long as nobody else is dangling from a Black Hawk, I think we'll see how that goes from there. Dr. Omar Hamada, thank you so much for your service and for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dana. Thanks for what you do.
Mm-hmm. Of course. We have a lot more coming up, folks. Keep it right here. So you might have seen this tweet from Ford Europe yesterday. It reads, quote, "You asked #Ford to make the #VeryGayRaptor a reality, and we heard you. Our real-life version made its debut at Cologne Pride last week in all its rainbow-adorned glory," end quote. As a friend of mine noted and asked yesterday, weren't Ford Raptors already gay? Everyone wants a #VeryGayRaptor. Now, just a guess, but I don't know any dude that has a truck in any part of the world that would be caught dead or alive in a Raptor, much less a very gay Raptor. I'm kidding. Dudes with big belt buckles and leather cowboy boots, they're begging for this truck because, like Ford Europe's tweet says, this is the Ford Raptor you asked for. And that's why Ford Europe is making thousands of them. In fact, we hear there are lines around the block at the dealerships for the Very Gay Raptor. I'm not joking. I'm totally serious. Actually, nobody at all asked for the Very Gay Raptor. It's like that meme where no one. And then Ford, why don't we do a Very Gay Raptor? I mean, not even gay people in Europe asked for a Very Gay Raptor. Again, sidebar, have you met gay people, Ford? Because they don't drive around in Raptors. I'm just saying. Like I always say the story, like our neighbors when we lived in St. Louis, they were very nice gay people that lived next to. They had bottle service in their backyard barbecue. They're not going to be driving around in a Raptor. Anyway, I'm sorry if you have a Raptor, but we should have known. I mean, these are marketers after all. Now, how do we know that nobody actually asked for the Very Gay Raptor? Because we scratched a little deeper and we actually watched the video that came from Ford Europe and discovered the real story. So apparently somebody on the social Webernet said that the blue-colored Raptor launch model that was from Ford Europe was very gay. And reportedly many Chevy truck owners agree with that statement. But I digress. The very gay comment prompted this response from Ford Europe. Watch. You know what else is gay? That guitar riff. So that is the actual truth about how the #VeryGayRaptor was actually born. So shockingly, despite what Ford Europe led us to believe, it turns out nobody asked for it after all. Really? You're literally going to do a whole advertising campaign on some rando in a YouTube comment section? No, you had some advertising creatives and completely non-imaginative marketing executives. They decided, we got a great idea, guys. Let's virtue signal at the same time that we're rolling out this horrid vehicle that nobody wants. So they made a Very Gay Raptor truck, thinking that it would get them to a one-way ticket to, I don't know, maybe the Cannes Advertising Award Festival in France or, I don't know, something. A guy can dream, but in the end, This is just a marketing stunt. That's the actual story. Can you imagine your product sucks so bad that you think that by painting rainbows on it, it will make it suck less? So as it turns out, Ford Europe is not going to be making thousands of these trucks that you asked for it after all. I mean, I don't know if you know anyone out there that thought they were going to get one of the very gay Raptors for Christmas. You have your friend or your spouse or somebody has horrible taste. I'm sorry if you have a Raptor, but I'm not sorry. Anyway, there really is like the ugliest looking. It's ugly, right? I mean, in that paint job, I mean, Rainbow Bright would even be caught dead in that thing, for real. You know, just because someone's gay doesn't mean that they don't have taste. But apparently people at Ford don't. I will say Ford didn't take the government bailout, so I don't want to be totally harsh on them, but that I feel offended by the color and the color choices and that horrible yellow. That's like a Dijon yellow. That's a mustard yellow. That's disgusting. Don't do that again. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night and don't bend the knee.